need to know. You can find it here at the Sonia Poulton Show, giving you the lowdown where others will not go. Wake up to the Sonia Poulton Show.
Wonderful, and welcome to Wake Up Later on Wednesday, the 19th of March, 2025. It is exactly 5 p.m. GMT, and thank you to the lovely John Young from Norwich for today's theme tune. John had a catastrophic accident in January, which resulted in surgery, and he was forced to listen to the Jeremy Vine show from a neighbouring bed, but he's back with us, and thank you, John. I love that tune. That is fun. That is so much fun. Hello to you all. Good afternoon to you all. Hello and welcome to the show that sees people as individuals and not as faceless entities. Yes, indeed. You are more than a number around here. And what is on today's show? Well, we will be joined by researcher Dan Stevens, who will be talking about geoengineering, gaslighting and lies. And Dan has a really interesting theory, and I want to see what you think about it. We'll also be joined by Justice campaigner Tom Minogue, who I had promised you last week. I said he was coming on this week, and he's going to be joining us to talk about the Dunblane Cullen report and secret societies, which I'm very much looking forward to. And do you remember, beautiful, glorious people, 5 years ago today? Do you remember, as of 19th of March 2020, COVID-19 was no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease in the UK, and yet several days later, they still put us into lockdown. If there was ever any evidence that everything was built on an absolute lie, you're looking at the document right there. Karma for Starmer, says Katie. How are you all, everybody in the comments? How are you all? Hello, Colin. I met Colin on Monday. More about that in a short while. We're going to be talking about the Lucy Letby Monday. Thank you for being here, by the way. I will put a link in the description if I haven't already to the live stream from Monday. Also on today's show, we'll be looking at the JFK files that have been released, the problems with AI music as articulated by Shin. But actually, it's more, rather than the problems with AI, it's more of an actual celebration of creativity, which I suppose is in itself the problems with AI music. And how do you make a toxic brand even more toxic? Why? You add a genocidal maniac and a porn star to the proceedings. More on that shortly. CIA is currently in lockdown. We're all aware of that. Loads of cops all over the place. Shots have been fired. Cops have swarmed the CIA headquarters after a man with a gun was heard making threats outside an entry gate. And there's police and the SWAT teams are there. And yes, they're all there. They are indeed. And I wonder if that is related to the JFK files, but we'll be talking about that shortly. And I just want to register and acknowledge the horrific pain and fear that has been generated by Labour's intended cuts to welfare. Absolutely awful. I saw this 13 years ago when they started on sick and disabled people, and they're doing it all over again. And I will be joined on Friday by someone who can tell me more about how these cuts will directly impact them. And you wonderful people, if you want us to include what you're experiencing, what you think about these intended cuts, please write to me, Sonia Poulton at sky.com, or tweet me or message me on social media. Yes, indeed, do that. I absolutely disagree with Wes Streeting's assessment about that. He said, oh, mental health is completely overdiagnosed, but I'm actually concerned that people are going to struggle with this. I think this is a horrible threat that's hanging over people, and the level of demonization. I've seen it all before. You see people, politicians and media put out absolute lies and tripe. Their favorite one was, should somebody with ADHD be getting a £52,000 BMW? I hate that level of propaganda. And if you are part of that propaganda, shame on you. There are genuinely vulnerable people who will struggle with this. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. Absolutely. It's absolutely shocking. And what else to say? Well, I was obviously in Liverpool on Monday. Thank you all to the wonderful people I met and who talked on our live stream. We were there, of course, for the Lucy Letby protest, which I got there and it had already finished, but that was absolutely fine. And we did the live stream outside, very spontaneous, had loads of great guests. I was absolutely blessed. Want to show you the protest, though, because wonderful Colin Guthrie, who's in our comments, did actually do some recording. I've edited them, Colin, but here's some snippets. You'll never walk alone, of course, from Jerry and the Pacemakers. If there's, I mean, other than the Beatles, but if there's a song that you'd ever associate with Merseyside, it's that one. Oh, yes, indeed it is. Yes, Monday was great. Absolutely great. I was so grateful to everybody. Spoke to a retired doctor and nurse who hid her identity for fear of being dragged into a disrepute situation with the NHS. I spoke to podcaster Carl. I spoke to Paul Cardin, who's often one of our commenters. I spoke to Colin Guthrie, and it was just lovely. It was lovely to meet everybody. It really was. And here's lovely Colin. There's a picture that was taken of us. Lovely to meet you, Colin. Real joy and pleasure. And thank you very much for your footage. I truly appreciate that. Yes, I do. And what I did was, after the live stream, I went into the town hall. They let me in as a journalist. The Thirlwell inquiry, of course, looking into the events around Lucy Letby. Lucy Letby, if anybody needs reminding, is the former neonatal nurse who was convicted of the murder of 7 children and the further 7 attempts of attempted murder of 7 babies as well. And there is just like a huge sort of counter narrative that has arisen. The Thirlwell inquiry was launched in September 2024. This week is the closing arguments. Lady Thirlwell said at the start of Monday's proceedings that she had received a request to pause the inquiry from Lucy Letby's new barrister. And I saw 2 people talking in the period of time that I was there. I was there for just over half an hour. I managed to get in about 12:15, and I stayed there until it broke for lunch, which was just coming up to 1 o'clock. Really interesting. I talked to people there at the town hall. I listened to what was said, and it was absolutely evident that I can tell you that this is about proving that mistakes were made and lessons will be learned. That's it. I've seen enough inquiries in my life to know what's going on here. And there was no suggestion that there's going to be a pause, despite the fact that there is significant new evidence. But no, this inquiry is going ahead whether people like it or not. My observations very much were that they are going through the motions. I listened to some of what Miss Richards from the Care Quality Commission had to say. And again, it was very much, there were problems. We acknowledge that, and lessons will be learned. And the same thing with the Nursing and Midwifery Council. I heard all of the submission from Miss Butler Cole. And she said, we're not going to be advancing an argument for a pause. They all just they want to wipe their hands of it. They absolutely do, which is why I have even more admiration for former doctor and the current serving nurse for coming and speaking. If you remember, she had to hide her face with a mask. She petrified. She was absolutely petrified. Yes, indeed, Teresa. Sending love and healing to Crazy Bunny, who is not with us today because she had a tooth operation. And we love her lots and hope she's okay. But the whole Lucy Letby thing, I think we all know, it's a foregone conclusion. This is now a formality as far as I can see. I read through Monday's proceedings because at the end of the day, for the most part, they then put up the entire transcript of the day. And I read through it and it's all the same thing. Nobody wants to advance an argument of a pause. They're not interested in that. They want to get this done and dusted now. And that's just kind of like reality, and it's horrible. It's really horrible, and it's just another miscarriage of justice as far as I'm concerned. Right, the JFK files, and thank you for showing out. Thank you so much, truly, for showing out. I do truly appreciate that. Right, just to say, the JFK files released yesterday. I haven't seen the Martin Luther King ones. They were supposed to be released at the same time, but there are references to Martin Luther King in the JFK files, 80,000 pages, including 2,182 PDF documents on the National Archives website. You get typewritten reports, you get handwritten notes spanning decades. It tells us that Lee Harvey Oswald had a poor shot, that the Secret Services had been warned Kennedy would be killed in August, 3 months before the murder. There's a huge volume of documents for people to go through. And I've talked to some people today, and they said it'll be a long time before the full significance will become clear. Colonel Towner Watkins, who was on Wake Up recently, talking about false flag attacks and Operation Gladio, has said today to be careful, that the CIA likely planted some of these documents themselves. And I think we'd be dumb to rule that out. I truly do. And also, in many respects, it's the repeat of a similar drop by Joe Biden years ago. Researchers of this case do not expect the official narrative to be overturned, and that is that Kennedy was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald, who in turn was shot by Jack Ruby. The files talk about Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby being seen in a nightclub together. That it's not allowing for the fact that there was more than one shooter, even though the evidence it would appear to suggest absolutely it was impossible for it to be one shooter. But here's the thing, right? Here's the question. What do X, formerly Twitter, and the JFK files have in common? Do not criticize Israel. Do not mention Israel. That is a reality. Is there a more powerful country, a more powerful influence on our world than Israel? I don't think so. And it's evident that these files have not been released for so long as a consequence of actually protecting any involvement towards Israel. That is the reality. The CIA notes on redaction are all redact this. Anything to do with linking it to Israel, redact it. Redact Israeli secret services. Redact Mossad. It's the same thing over and over again. So I do think it's going to take us a little while before we are able to work out. It's a lot of pages to go through. I've only just started to go through them. I've asked experts for feedback, but I will let you know over the next few shows if there's anything worth happening. If there's anything worth happening in these files that we need alerting to. But at this moment in time, the only other thing that I've noticed from the JFK files is that they are confirming that James Earl Ray killed Martin Luther King. Again, can we believe them? And I really think that we should bear in mind what Colonel Towner Watkins has to say. It's highly likely that the CIA realized at some stage this is going to be obviously declassified. Let's shove in documents that we want to throw them off. It happens. Hate to say it happens. And I'm very disturbed today to see that the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance have changed their working definition of anti-Semitism to include conflating the assassination of JFK to Jews or Israel. It is now anti-Semitic, apparently, according to that definition, to say Israel was involved in any way in the cover-up or shooting of JFK. So there you go. Right, I want to bring in my first guest, a couple of minutes behind here. Let's get cracking with him. Dan Stevens, lovely to have you with us, Dan.
Sonia,
how are you doing?
How are you? Yeah, good. Yeah, good. You enjoying the nice weather?
I am enjoying the nice weather, actually, although I'm still a bit nippy and chilly, really. But we're going to talk about weather, aren't we, Dan? You are, of course, a researcher, and you're somebody that I've talked to extensively about geoengineering. You take a decent battering online. You always fight back. And one of the things, just briefly give people some background who may not be familiar with you, although we've talked about it before, but you were the whistleblower for the government's doping scandal, weren't you? And why were you the whistleblower?
Well, I exposed doping in the UK at the same time that the UK were in Russia trying to accuse Russia of doping. So I become quite involved in this whole subject of current affairs and everything you see at the moment, going all the way back to 2014, 2016, when I became involved in this doping situation and realised there was a lot of doping going on in the UK. I'd also realised that a lot of athletes had reported that information to UK anti-doping funded Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee. At the time, I think it was headed up by Damien Collins MP, who ironically was a MP that wanted to ban David Icke or put David Icke in prison for talking about certain things. So what I saw and what I was witnessing at the time outside of the doping was this kind of overarching campaign to demonize Russia. Sport being used for that. And I think the interest for the Sunday Times for me was that, or with me, that had information at the time the journalists there were trying to look at doping. And they were looking at doping. I think if we recall the whole doping thing where, you know, Zeb Coe was invited to speak in Parliament, or, you know, speak to the Digital Culture Media Sport Committee, DMS, and refused to go. And I think since that scandal broke with me, we've had a lot of stories sort of going on from that, with Dr. Freeman that was buying testosterone as a doctor working for British Cycling. He was also buying Viagra. He was also buying anti-acne drugs, you know, and the staff, he said they were staff. The General Medical Council found that he was guilty of doing that. And likewise, the doctor in my case that I was involved with, also investigated by the GMC, and they too found that he was doing exactly what I said he was doing,
right?
Despite UK anti-doping, you know, with the blessing of the DCMS, publishing a statement saying I was making it all up and I was just a frustrated low-ranking cyclist that didn't ever win a race and needed to
That's
dope,
been their favourite
which actually
description of
wasn't
you.
true either. You know, I was winning elite level races, and what they did is they relied on the racing I was doing was not on the road; it was off road, like mountain biking, things like this. And I was winning at an elite level. And the way British cycling work is they have a points system for road races. Do no races, you'll have no points, but you may do it for fitness. They kind of isolated that and tried to use that to make it look like it was a crap athlete. Basically.
So you, Dan, I'm going to bring you on to what we're here to talk about. So you are no stranger to tackling controversial topics, Dan, which is why I wanted you to give people a bit of background if they're not familiar with you. And I want to draw on one of your tweets because I think it kind of exemplifies what we're going to talk about today. You said, many of us know geoengineering has already begun, and I suspect a large scale global geoengineering operation started en masse around July 2020. Now, to be clear, you're not saying geoengineering started then. You're saying a new large-scale mass operation started then. Talk to us, Dan.
Well, I, as an athlete, I'm always out and about, you know, training, riding, running, skiing, whatever. So, you know, athletes more than anyone are kind of aware of the weather and the weather patterns and what you should wear and dress up in to stay warm and dry, etc. So I started seeing this change in the weather really from 2017, 18, 19, and then we had COVID and they downed all the planes, and as we all know, it was lovely and sunny and
great.
The sky was blue like it is today, but for a long period of time, for 3 months, it was like that. And what I noticed, when the planes resumed their flights, then I really noticed change in the weather. Throughout lockdown, I'm curious as to what was going on, because the roads that I trained on, remember, I've trained on these roads now for 20 years. They were covered in a wet dust, and it looked like they'd been salting the roads. But remember, we were in April, and the weather was, you know, shorts and t-shirt weather. So from that point forward, I've become more observant, and I've noticed more changes in length, that the condensation trails coming out the back of the plane, the frequency of those, the patterns of those, the volume of air traffic, which has led me to research as people do, you know, publications and things that are published on this. And I think one of the things that's really key is the and you know, we've discussed this before, the House of Commons report on the regulation of geoengineering, which was done by the Science and Technology Committee. And there's a sentence in there where they say that they need to effectively roll out a large-scale geoengineering experiment.
They do.
And I think I sent you the, what is quote that to me. I sent you the screenshot, actually, the exact sentence, what they say.
Right, let me just have a look at this. This is this where it says previous scrutiny of geoengineering? A large geoengineering test could have global repercussions. Deployment certainly would. Is it that?
Yeah, and deployment certainly would. So the report's quite key, because what they're saying is a geoengineering test, so the key word there is a test, could have a global repercussion. So imagine doing a geoengineering test. We sit down, we plan this out, and we say, okay, we know our test is going to have a global repercussions, and the deployment of that test certainly would. So what that suggests is they're planning to do a global test, deploy a global test. Now, the other document I found that was quite interesting was the US military document, said owning the weather as a force multiplier by the year 2025.
Right.
Now, obviously, we've seen this build up of geoengineering chatter on social media, and the volume's increased, the images have increased, the bots have increased, the mainstream media
That's true.
Tours also increased, and that coincides with the US saying we want to own the weather by 2025. So here we are in 2025, where everyone's saying, you know, I think they're controlling the weather, and you've got the US military back in, I think it was 1996, saying, well, by 2025 we want to own the weather. And I think, you know, I saw you mentioned the JFK files. I think one thing is clear is that the governments, certainly the US government, seems to be run really by the CIA, that really kind of do what they want, despite people not wanting them to do that. And probably would say that, you know, involved in that is other Five Eyes intelligence agencies as well.
Indeed.
So my question is, why would we see the implementation of the very thing that the House of Commons report refers to, that in completely consistent with the objectives laid out by the US military back in 1996, and that all coincides with the period from 2020 onwards through the pandemic? Now, remember, we're in a pandemic. Hospitals are shut, military is shut, the world is shut down, and yet somehow we managed to roll out a large-scale global geoengineering test, which is what this House of Commons report seems to be referring to. The other thing that also concerns me is the ingredients of what they're spraying. Aluminium is what they're spraying. Aluminium is also in, you know, the other things that we're not really allowed to talk about on YouTube.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Aluminium is sprayed. Aluminium is blank. Silver iodine is also sprayed. One of the side effects of one of the toxicity side effects of silver iodine is also myocarditis. Myocarditis is also caused by the blank.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I'm seeing a pattern here where childhood asthma also increased. I think the NHS reports statistics of about 145% in the period from 2020 to 20.
Yeah, it's a
22.
huge jump. It is. And
Yeah.
so what you're doing is you're taking all this information together and you're saying that would make a perfect cover for this global project to be rolled out. And it would. You're not suggesting that was the only reason for it, are you? Because there's obviously loads of other things like, you know, digital ID, a cashless society, a social credit system that is obviously being implemented. There's so much else, but they never just use anything for one thing, do they? There's lots of other agendas.
My view is that let's be cynical and say, okay, maybe it was the only thing. Yeah, all of the other talking points have led to a situation where people are so invested in those that any talk of the other situation, the geoengineering maybe causing all these issues, is kind of taboo even within the truth movement.
Yeah,
because
how can that be?
the truth movement, you know, this kind of thing that these kind of satanic people running government have to tell you what they're going to do, that narrative enforces the documents that support what could just be disinformation. Because I can't remember told everyone in Hiroshima that they were about to get blown off the face of the earth.
Ooh.
Or Nagasaki.
Right.
That.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So no, they don't have to tell you what they're going to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have this, though, don't we, Dan, which you pointed out to me, is we get all these mixed messages, don't we, in the media. So what's the game here? You have the BBC saying, no, UK weather is not being manipulated. And then The Guardian essentially fessing up to it. I mean, this is from last Wednesday, even in The Guardian. What do you make of this? Is this gaslighting or what?
Yeah, I think the overarching topic is we are clearly being gaslit to hell and back on this, and people have got short memories. Like the layperson that's not really paying much attention will see the BBC article as we're not manipulating the weather, but then now they'll read the Guardian article where they admit to doing it, use a different vocabulary. So the BBC is no, UK weather is not being manipulated. But then they say, well, the UK's gamble on solar is like using aspirin for cancer. The lay person probably doesn't know that they're talking about the same thing. And this is where the House of Commons report, the Royal Institution report become quite interesting, because they've tried to create different labels for the same thing to allow you to call people conspiracy theorists because they're talking about chemtrails. They've then pushed that narrative into the conspiracy movement, so the conspiracy types know it as chemtrails, while in mainstream academia and news and in the Guardian and these left-wing rags, they refer to it as stratospheric solar radiation management, climate remediation. So if you're a sophisticated, educated person who thinks they know what the world is about because they've read the Guardian, you'll be talking about stratospheric aerosol injections. Calling your hippie mate, who's your hippie neighbour, who's a tattoo artist down the local pub, a conspiracy theorist because he's talking about chemtrails. It's like, it's the same subject. We're talking about stratospheric aerosol spraying in relation to blocking out the sun. People have observed that, and it's been labelled chemtrails, and the academics are talking about it as stratospheric aerosol spray. It's almost like reinventing the actual phrase conspiracy theorist, and then at the same time having another label for the same thing. It just reminds me of that kind of labeling. The conspiracy theorists look at chemtrails, and the grown-ups talk about blocking the sun and climate remediation. So it's just double talk. It's double talk. It's hypocrisy. It's gaslighting. I don't really know what the name of it is, because this kind of psychological warfare we've not really been experiencing. This period in history we've not experienced before. We've not experienced anything like it. We don't yet really know what it is all about and what we'd call it and label it and how we'd analyze it.
And I think it's interesting because obviously it's 5 years ago today when they downgraded COVID-19, but they still went ahead with lockdown anyway, which really suggests that, anybody watching this is very clued up and also knows we have to be careful because we're on YouTube. But the idea that they went ahead was because they had so many other things that they needed to push through at that moment in time. So what you're suggesting is not as insane as it might appear. And also the other thing, which I don't know if you've commented on this already, was the jump in aluminium pricing. You already commented on that.
No, and that's absolutely critical. Now,
that is
the price of aluminium went through the roof, absolutely went through the roof when they put the planes back into the sky. Now, at the time, if you recall, like when aluminium, the price of aluminium goes up, would normally follow it. Right, and if aluminium, silver, and these metals go up, gold would typically follow it. As the price of aluminium goes up, let's assume that they're buying it for geoengineering. You see this Nazara, Jazara, QAnon buy loads of gold kind of thing. The purpose of that is it's manipulating the value of gold. It's encouraging people to buy gold, and it makes the increase in metals slightly less obvious.
I see. That is curious.
They're spraying silver iodine, they're spraying aluminium, they're buying it in bulk, and the price of that goes up. One of the ways of camouflaging that is to find a method that will make people buy gold en masse. And that's exactly what they did in the period with QAnon. Do you remember the whole Jazara Nazara, the banking system's going to collapse within the next month? Buy as much gold as you can because money's going to be worthless. Well, actually, what they were really trying to do is manipulate the value of gold to hide the increase in aluminium and silver through the mass purchasing of the materials they need for geoengineering.
I think the problem that we're having is trying to get the information is so difficult. I see Lewis Brackpool as one example, the journalist. He's been trying to get data on geoengineering, and obviously they're so coy about it in government. It's not something that they want to discuss at all. And this is 5 years on from what you're talking about, Dan.
Well, the Royal Institution report is interesting as well, because, you know, like what we're seeing in America with this whole Doge stuff and the USA stuff is clear evidence of mass money laundering through NGOs, period. Yeah, billions and billions of pounds put through NGOs with kickbacks into, you know, high-ranking Congress people that, you know, got $177,000 a year salary, but a net worth of 2.5 billion, should I say, in some cases. So I think Lewis is onto he's not onto a winner there, because my view is that the GO are responsible for the geoengineering, and I think the period in Britain where where geoengineering seemed to stop for nearly 2 weeks, only a few weeks ago, was very unusual. But that happened almost as soon as all that USAID funding was cut from these NGOs. Now, at that point, Keir Starmer, if you remember, was rallying for more money for Ukraine. Within 2 days of Keir Starmer putting a tweet out to say that I've actually paid £750 million of that, the geoengineering starts again. It was almost like someone's run out of money. Some in British Parliament, in British government, had to pay somebody else to start the program again, and it started again. The framing stuff is remarkable.
Can you see this? It's not geoengineering, it's for the missile defense shield. Telling you, said DJ Darkside Jungle. Does that make sense to you?
No, disagree completely.
There's
an account on X run by a girl called Caroline Coram that's tried to run a stop to say that the good guys are geoengineering to pull arsenic out of the air to protect us from the bad guys. So the bad guys are covertly poisoning us with arsenic, and the good guys are spraying aluminium into the air to basically contaminate the skies. Yeah, and these are psyops. You know, the talk that they're spraying into there to create missile defense systems is just nonsense in my view. And the reason I say that is because there are thousands and thousands of patents for geoengineering. Yeah,
exactly. Now that is important. Yeah.
Now what's key is who could be doing this, right? When you start looking at some of the patents for fuel additives, right, you start looking at where fuel comes from, and the fuel suppliers are typically quite desert areas, aren't they? So if you could put you're in a desert and you're supplying fuel to the west, would it make sense to slip an additive into the fuel to make the weather change, to make your desert less desert-like and more fertile? You know, and on that basis, I'd kind of refer back to what we saw in Dubai recently and Dubai's admission to the fact that they are geoengineering. But the weather's a closed system in a ball, in my view, and if you change the weather in Europe, that's ultimately going to have an effect on the weather elsewhere in the world. So modification and weaponized weather all go hand in hand. Like if you're weaponizing weather, it's brilliant because it's akin to, you know, Nazi bombers dropping the bombs over Germany, knowing that they're not going to actually affect anyone until they land, but they're going to land in Britain. And the weaponization of the weather is really important. And Israel are really important. Yet again, when it comes to weather modification, the Royal Institution report and the House of Commons report repeatedly refer to the legalities of geoengineering. start looking at litigation on geoengineering, you'll see that France sued Israel because France believed Israel had stolen their rainwater. So in litigation, and obviously you're aware of litigation yourself, what you're going to be looking at is your causation and quantum. What is your loss? How was that loss caused? Can we prove that that loss was caused by activity? So the argument in litigation was that even if Israel had stolen France's rainwater, you've got to prove that the weather modification activity was sufficiently high enough to be successful. And not only have you got to prove that it was successful, you've also got to prove that despite it being successful, that it just wouldn't have not rained in that week anyway. And doing that in court against the backdrop, and bear in mind, this litigation I'm talking about goes back to the late 1970s. So imagine doing that in court against a mainstream academia structure of climate change. So
it's a lot. It's a lot to unravel, and unfortunately, we don't have time to unravel it as much as I'd like to, because it's just the nature of this show, really. But Dan, come back, continue this conversation with us as you always do, because I think that's important as well. And I think it's important what you've had to say. It's a possibility, the theory that you're working with around this period 5 years ago. So thank you for that. Thanks for joining us, Dan. Listen, take good care of yourself, okay? Dan Stevens, everybody.
Take care. Thanks,
Good to have you. Thank you with us. Thank you with us. Good to have you. I can't even find my own words. I see my next guest is here and I don't want to keep him. Thank you so much, everybody. Somebody mentioned Dane Wigington. I've interviewed Dane before. I talked to him last week about coming on a Wednesday night because it's easier for him because he's in the US. So hopefully he'll be on with us soon. But I don't want to keep my next guest waiting any longer. This is something that I discussed last week and I want to discuss it again. And he's with us. So let's not hold him. Here he is, Tom Minogue. How are you, Tom?
I'm fine, Sonia. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for being here, Tom. You describe yourself as a justice campaigner and petitioner to the Scottish Parliament, calling for secret society membership declarations for judges and jurors. I found your blog, I don't even know how many years ago now it was. I found it to be one of the most enlightening blogs regarding Dunblane. Very insightful. You talked to some of the right people. And I wanted to talk to you about the Cullen report. Of course, the Cullen report was the consequence, the inquiry into what had happened at Dunblane. Last week was the 29th anniversary of the Dunblane massacre. Of course, 16 children and their teacher were murdered by Thomas Hamilton. Talk to me, Tom. The Cullen report. First of all, I want you to answer this question because you do talk about it, and that is: was Lord Cullen the right judge?
No, for several reasons. He wasn't the right judge. But to make it clear, I didn't have a preconceived notion about that initially. To let you understand, in May, 29th of May, I think, 1996, my wife and I, my son and his partner, and my daughter's fiance attended her graduation at Stirling University. And it had been moved from the venue it was supposed to be at, which was the Victoria Halls, to the university's assembly hall, I think it was. And, you know, as we stood there, full of pride to see our daughter reach the end of her academic life, I was very conscious that just down the road, a mile away, in the Victoria Halls, there was grieving parents who'd never even saw their children start their academic life. So, but despite some scepticism about the Scottish legal establishment, following the Magic Circle affair, which my lawyer was involved in, actually, he was central to it. But despite that, I fully expected an independent, a thorough, transparent, and comprehensive examination by Lord Cullen of the events that led to the Dunblane massacre.
I don't know why that. Sorry about that. Yeah.
I expected that. In the event and subsequently finding out, there was a lot of reasons why that was never going to happen. And It wasn't independent for a start, as the Secretary of State who recommended Cullen, by letter of 14th of March, that's just one day after the shooting, he stated that providing the right judge is selected, we need not fear any overreaction on his part. Now, this is a politician saying, we've got our man here and provide he's not going to overreact. And less than a week later, in a supper at Bute House, where Forsyth, the Secretary of State and all the senior people in the judiciary and Cullen were, they published a menu which said that Cullen would find it helpful if he would be kept in touch with developments in government thinking. So straight away, you've got the government interfering with a supposed independent inquiry. And Lord Forsyth also stated in that same menu that he had destroyed early correspondence with his constituent, Thomas Hamilton. And in his life, in Hamilton's life, Forsyth had encouraged him to publicise his victory with the Ombudsman when he won his case when he was thrown out of schools in the area. So the man who appointed Cullen, Michael Forsyth, was also top HMC, Her Majesty's Commissioner, for QVS. So was Cullen's boss in the judiciary, the Lord Justice Clerk, Lord Ross, and David McElhose. And both of these commissioners were members of the SPEC. And of course, Cullen himself would go on to be ex officio Her Majesty's Commissioner of QVS by dint of his elevation to Lord Justice Clerk. So there's a lot of reasons why this wasn't going to be independent.
Exactly. Tom, let me just explain to people, when you say QVS, you're talking about Queen Victoria School, which is mentioned a great deal. You're also talking about the Speculative Society, right? Yeah. Which is very interesting. And I like your insights about Queen Victoria School. You knew the housemaster, didn't you? Yes, yeah. Go on.
Eventually, I was running a business and I got on with my business hoping that Cullen would do a proper job. And I was too busy with other things to really pay too much attention. But fast forward to 2001, I was involved in what should have been a commercial dispute, ended up being charged with a criminal case against me, which I successfully defeated, but it had Masonic overtones. And at the very onset, I'd asked the sheriff hearing the case to make a declaration with regard to Masonic membership. He declined that, palmed it off to a lady sheriff quite neatly, who gave me her assurance that there was no Masonic element with her. But she said, as far as judges having an obligation to make this, I would need to take that to the Parliament. And that's what I did. I petitioned the Scottish Parliament, as you've rehearsed on my introduction, calling for a register, calling for judges to register membership, not just of Freemasons, but for any fraternal obligations that they might have. So I was busily involved in that, and it was with the Parliament for about 3 years, between 2001 and 2003. And it was just kicked about in principle. The arguments all centred on principle. Was I right in principle? And then I saw the writing on the wall because the committee's makeup changed. 2 members came on board who were obviously Masons or friends of the Masons. And they more or less said, I've got to prove it. I've got to prove that Freemasonry interferes with decisions of the court. So I was given that task. And I cited 4 cases. One was a Social Security case concerning Freemasonry, where a man successfully got an assurance from a Social Security Commissioner that he was entitled to know if the chair was a Freemason. The other one was the concerns of Hans Kochler, who was the UN appointed observer to the Lockerbie trial, who was concerned about the number of judges belonging to the Speculative Society of Edinburgh, the SPEC, at the Lockerbie trial. He was concerned, that was published in the paper, so nothing secret about that. The other case was Robbie the Pict, who was an anti-toll campaigner, Skybridge Tolls, and he was against the judge who was a member of the SPEC, as was the toll concessionary civil servant. So there were 3 cases. And the 4th case I chose, given my knowledge of what had happened with Glenn Harrison at QVS, was the Dunblane inquiry and the concerns of Billy Burns, who was another petitioner to the Parliament, who had asked Lord Cullen at the very onset, before the inquiry had begun, to state his Masonic status. Lord Cullen hadn't done this. He'd neatly sidestepped it, got his clerk to do it. So within that framework, I managed to introduce the case of Glenn Harrison, the housemaster at QVS. And I'd satisfied myself that what Glenn Harrison was saying online was true, and which was essentially that Thomas Hamilton was a very frequent visitor to Queen Victoria School. That he seemed to be one of the friends of Queen Victoria School, and he was shocked when he saw the shooting come up. He himself had believed that pupils were being abused by people known as the Friends of QVS, and he was shocked when he saw this face come up on the screen. So I took up his case, and for the first time I thought, I'm going to get this publicised. And I got it in the Parliament, in my documents, but lo and behold, the Parliament, which was really something they'd never done before, decided not to publish any of this because it might be defamatory. They had legal advice that it was defamatory. Now, all of the things I'd said were measured, and they've all turned out to be true, as the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry has found out. Most of what Glenn Harrison alleged has now been backed up by fact. Right. So that's where we are. That's the short answer to where we are. The process of examining Glenn Harrison's claim was I had to go up and see him eye to eye. He told me over the phone of what was happening. He knew of my interest in my petition. That was one thing, but I really had to go and see him, and I believed him. He came across as a sincere man who'd done the right thing, and then he fell foul of the authorities at Queen Victoria School. I then proved as fact most of his allegations. The fact that his door was broken down by the police with a sledgehammer, that's a matter of record. The fact that Hansard records his allegations of abuse at the school. The fact that he wrote to every parent at the time that under his charge and warned them of abuse of their sons. So these were very, very heavy matters, and I believed them.
Tom, is it still a cover-up? Because many people talk about, of course, the fact that the files were not to be unsealed for 100 years. And then they released information, didn't they? They released some of the files, and they said it's because children are involved. That's why there has to be this secrecy around it. But do you believe that in our lifetime we're going to get to the truth of what happened?
Absolutely not. No. And that was the basis of Billy Burns's petition to Parliament. Right. And I quoted his case. The main chap who fought against the 100-year ruling was a chap called William W. Scott from North Berwick. And he proved that there was no statutory basis for it. This was just something that Lord Cullen had come up with. But, no, there's no basis for that. But the most striking thing I found at looking at Glenn Harrison's claims, I couldn't prove Freemasonry as he thought was the sort of conduit for the abuse.
Right,
you can't prove that.
Right.
So I didn't try. I mean, the headmaster admitted he was a Freemason, Julian Hankinson. But other than that, no, you're never going to prove that. But the claims of Thomas Hamilton being a frequent visitor were pretty easily proven. I just got a PDF of the transcript of the trial and of the inquiry and searched it, and there was 3 quite separate references to Thomas Hamilton at the school. The first was by Thomas Hamilton's neighbour, a woman who knew Tom used to pack his tents when he was going up to hold camps at the school, at Queen Victoria School. The next was a student who Thomas Hamilton had got a job in the summer camp at the school. He would be able to find him a job at the school. And the third one was a woman who had been on the firing range and told her boyfriend about it with Tommy Hamilton. Now, these three quite separate pieces of evidence coming on days 3, I think 14 and 18 of the inquiry, you would have thought that when somebody said that, that would have been like the fire alarm going off, you know.
Right.
Cullen's sitting there. His boss in the judiciary is one of the top Queen Victoria School commissioners. The man who appointed him to his role is the top, by ex officio, the Secretary of State is the top commissioner at Queen Victoria School.
Dear God.
And you would think it would have been pounced on immediately, and it's like the tumbleweed comes over, nothing's said.
Yeah, they don't want it to be known. They don't want it to be known.
It's impossible. And I just thought somebody, one of the advocates must have heard it. One of the reporters must have raised it. To me, it was startling, but nothing was said. And a judge who was so assiduous in looking at all the state schools had just completely blanked it. And knowing that he would go on to be Lord Justice Clerk, it was on the cards, and knowing that his boss was the top commissioner at the school, I just thought, this can't be right. They're covering it up, and I think that's gone right on to the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry.
Yeah, there's problems.
Lady Smith's done pretty much the same. She
Yeah.
said there was pretty much only one documented record of Hamilton being at the school when he was interviewed for a job in the firing range, but he never got it. And he never spoke to any boys since, and he never visited the school since. Well, how she can say that, I don't know. But, you know, there seems to be, any time anyone mentions this, it's just the shutters come down. And really, it's not surprising.
No,
because
no.
the people you're dealing with, you know, the Duke of Edinburgh was the patron at that time.
Right.
But all the commissioners I had them phoning me at the house here, Vice Admiral, Air Vice Marshal, Head of the Army in Scotland.
Yeah. Politicians.
Not asking me about the questions I was asking, but asking me, you know, what I knew about.
Exactly. What do you know? It's so interesting. I think I've already put a link to your blog because it's so fantastic, and it really gives you such an insight of what was taking place. And one of the things was the housemaster talked about how he'd witnessed children being taken out at the weekends. He said he made appeals to people, including Esther Ranson. Right.
Correct.
Right. Do we know what Esther had to say? Esther, of course, responsible for Childline, and would have been the obvious person, wouldn't she?
He got the same reply as the mention of Queen Victoria School did at the public inquiry. Nothing. Silence.
Right. Right. It's too. And the other thing that you've written about, which I think is really interesting, is you've tracked the sort of parallels between Thomas Hamilton and Jimmy Savile.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Talk to us about those parallels, because I think that's part of the story.
When Hamilton was identified as a shooter, it brought to mind the rumours that had been round in Dunfermline about a pervert who had been running clubs at two of the schools. One of the schools my children were at, and not at the same time, I would say, but he'd been kicked out. And then there was children from Dunfermline from one of his schools had been caught or found on the streets in Dunblane in their bare feet. They'd ran away from one of Thomas Hamilton's camps. So this was known about. And then I think the next day it appeared in the Scotsman that Hamilton had lived a charmed life due to Freemasonry. And certainly the next week, the Scotsman printed an article. They contacted 100 prominent Freemasons in Scotland, and they asked if they knew Thomas Hamilton's membership status. None of them would confirm or deny it. So it was well known. Everybody seemed to know about it. And similar to Jimmy Savile, everybody seemed to know that this guy had power, but nobody could do anything about it. In fact, my sister was a nurse in Ilkley. To let you understand, my family, we were brought up by foster parents. We were orphaned early. 4 of us, 2 sisters, and myself and my brother. My 2 sisters were both nurses. They went to stay with uncles in London, and my brother Joe and I, we came up here with an uncle up here. Now, we used to meet pretty regular once a year on holiday. And when I got married, the 4 of us got together the last time. I'm the only remaining sibling. But anyway, we got talking, and my sister Betty said to me, I bet you never knew that Margaret was asked out by Jimmy Savile. I said, no, I didn't. I said, when was this, Margaret? She said, when I was a nurse in Ilkley, and I'd visited her there. And I said, well, why didn't you go out with him? She said, oh, he used to come up in this big Rolls Royce when he was at Leeds. And she said, no, she said he was a horrible man.
She knew.
That's all she said.
Her
That's all she said.
Her instinct knew.
I wish now I would have pried, but obviously she didn't want to talk about it.
Right.
It was known. So, you know, and the way the press come out, everybody knew. I mean, the Scotsman's a pretty sort of conservative newspaper. And yet, for them to come out with this article about the charmed life Thomas Hamilton lived, and yet, the inquiry couldn't lay a finger on him. And of course, the people who should have been at the inquiry answering questions were not called.
It's
Simple as
insane.
that.
So really, I think what we're looking at here in terms of the parallel, it's Thomas Hamilton and Jimmy Savile were both protected for a reason. And so
Absolutely.
my understanding, Tom, is because it's highly likely that they were involved with very influential people. So it wasn't so much they themselves were being protected, but their exploits were being protected. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's several points. Of course, the police protected Hamilton because he was their tout. He was their grass, apparently.
Right.
Tam Dale had got that. That could be one reason. The other one that baffles me is how, you know, in the days before the iPhones and things like that, Hamilton was a photographer, wasn't he? And he took photographs of boys in to get developed in a chemist. The chemist wanted them, took them to the police. They go to the fiscal. The same as his camps in Loch Lomond. The mothers go to the police go to the fiscal. It never comes back. Nobody lays a glove on him. And so what did he know? He had power. Was it Freemason? Was it the fact he was a paedophile who knew important others who were paedophiles? You know, you can only guess. What I try and do is to show the anomalies in the way this has been examined, and there are boatloads of them, and there are so many connections. I mean, another Secretary of State, and again top commissioner at Queen Victoria School, Rifkin, Malcolm Rifkin, his agent and friend supplied Hamilton's guns and ammunition that he carried out the massacre with. He wasn't called to the inquiry.
Extraordinary.
The manager of the shop was called.
Extraordinary. The housemaster wasn't called to the inquiry,
He
was
wasn't
he?
called to the inquiry. And as I
Extraordinary.
say, he was on Hansard as being making allegations of abuse. He should have been the first one.
Of course
So
he
I
should.
try to highlight all these anomalies and let other people try and unravel the thread. But my main purpose initially was to sort of put up a beacon to say Glenn Harrison's, to let you understand, Glenn Harrison's first posting that I saw was on a website of a guy called Greg Lance Watkins. And it made the allegations, you know, that we all know about now. Thomas Hamilton at the school, boys being abused, Prince Philip's patron. And I thought that'll get taken down. And the next month when I went back and had a look and it's still there, I thought, no, it'll get taken down. MOD will get that removed. But it didn't. So it gave some presence, but it didn't have a very authentic ring. And I thought if I put something a bit more,
substantial.
Substantial, that any boys who thought they were on their own and wouldn't be believed could come to, then I was doing a job, because originally I did think that I could get it investigated again properly, and I took it to the Lord Justice Clerk, Lord Gill, who suggested I just take it to Her Majesty's Commissioners. I wasn't going to do that. I took it to the Solicitor General. She wouldn't touch it. It was a CD complaint. I took it twice by messenger at arms to her. She wouldn't touch it. I tried all sorts to get it in the public domain, and eventually, having failed even with Parliament to get it in the public domain, I thought I'd put it up so that boys who had been abused, and I believe some of the people that contacted me were definitely boys who had been abused, they had a sort of beacon up there that could go to and see that there was something wrong here, and it had been swept under the carpet.
Absolutely. And we've seen it all over the UK. We've seen it in Kincora, in Northern Ireland. We've seen it at the North Wales care homes. We've seen it in Scotland. It's all over. And I do think that there is this incredible invisible thread, invisible hands operating behind the scenes, which is why what you do is so important, Tom. It's so illuminating. And as I say, I've put a link in the description to your blog. Before you leave us, Tom, is there anything that you feel people should know about what took place and has still failed to kind of penetrate the mainstream?
Well, obviously there was the magic circle one. All the people who were cleared in that one later went on to do the things that they've been alleged to have, the things that they were cleared of doing. That was mainly in Thailand, of course. But there's got to be more openness. That generally, it's just, I think there are changes happening, because programs like your own and people now have got an alternative to the mainstream media,
right,
and they can air their concerns. Some of them are grossly exaggerated, but others, they can get it out there, and you can decide for yourself and highlight it and flag it up. But the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry is a bad example of openness. They've shut down anyone who, they didn't print my witness statement for a start, and they sent it to me, and every page says not to be republished. And really, I've just said what I've said in my blog online, which is what Glenn Harrison experienced and what is now proven largely to be true.
First person witness testimony not called to the inquiry tells us they had already decided. And that is the problem, isn't it, Tom? A lot of the time with these official inquiries is that the terms of reference are so narrow that it can't even begin to get to the truth.
Safe pair of hands, but Cullen, in his earlier one on the Piper Alpha, which I think is probably the bigger scandal than Queen Victoria School, he had a wide remit. He could have done anything he wanted, but he did everything bar say that these men on the death trap rig shouldn't have died, and that they should be, the company that presided over it and that owned it should have been prosecuted. But, the press, the mainstream media, by and large, other than a few notable exceptions, I've mentioned Marcello Mega, who was good on QVS and Dunblane. The mainstream media normally more and more seem to go along with it. They seem to go along with the cover up, the safe pair of hands for an inquiry, and everybody 10 years later, you might get a few anomalies, but it's all water under the bridge by then. So,
Tom, you've actually, in your own way, you've answered my very first question, and that is actually Lord Cullen was the right judge for in order for it to be a safe pair of hands, right?
Absolutely.
Got you. Lovely to have you with us, Tom. I will make sure to direct people to your blog so they can read in detail, because you've written stacks on this and about other secret societies. Really good stuff. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sonia.
Pleasure.
Cheers,
Randy says, keep sharing your knowledge, Tom. Indeed, this is what we need. More of this. Good stuff. Tom Minogue, everybody. Lovely to see you. Take care. Wonderful to see you. Right. Don't worry. I'm not going to bugger off quickly, people. I've got some things that I want to show you anyway. You know how it is. Sometimes we're going to go over, right? I want to talk about how do you make a toxic brand less toxic? This is an image of a Welsh beach. It says, don't buy a Tesla. And or Tesla, as they pronounce it. And of course, Tesla has plummeted. The shares are plummeting at an exponential rate. I mean, in Europe, I think in Germany, it's down 74% on sales, right? So what do you do when you find yourself in that situation? Of course, this has happened because the CEO, Elon Musk, is part of he's not really part of the Trump administration as such, because he's not been voted in and he's not elected and he's not actually employed, but he is overseeing Doge, which is about getting rid of government waste, and the backlash against it is absolutely huge, and people have decided to target him where they can, and that is on his cars. And let me just show you these images, because I think this is very interesting. If I can just find them, about how do you make a toxic brand less toxic. Well, what you don't do is you don't have Benjamin Netanyahu and Kim Kardashian promoting it. Two of the most toxic people in this world currently. So what you have is a genocidal maniac who is promoting it now, saying that he's going to put a bid on a tender for top officials to have Tesla cars. And Elon Musk responded his appreciation. And then Kim Kardashian, porn star Kim Kardashian, is in the bottom picture. And she uploaded that picture, I think, to her Instagram. And I just don't think that you can get any more toxic than that. It's absolutely nuts. It's so nuts. Thank you, Maggie Mac. Saying Brill chat. Thanks, Thomas Sonia. Truth will out, divine timing and all that. Indeed. So yes, that's how you make a toxic brand even more toxic. You invite a genocidal maniac and a porn star. I mean, what is anybody thinking? I have no idea at all. And I want to play this from our lovely Shin. Shin is one of our mods, and she gets very upset with AI music, as indeed do a lot of creatives. So Shin recorded this. I asked people if they want to do a 1 minute, either a rant or an appreciation or whatever. And this is what Shin recorded. Let's have a listen.
Time is life. The meaning of life is time. AI takes time out of actions. When I write a song, it takes time. And because of that time, when the song is finished, I've become a different person. I've grown. But when you use AI, there's not that time lapse, so you get things done, people will stop growing. It's like people don't want to plant a seed.
And I get that. I really do. And I think that the importance of creativity is exactly what Shin said, is that life moves on once you've created. And I do agree with her largely, but I've been forced to examine my own beliefs on this with the AI intro tune that we use. And that is, people sing that to me wherever I go. Good morning, Grand Rising. We even had Leslie in a balloon going over Marrakesh saying good morning, Grand Rising. And it's very catchy and people have remembered it. That creates a branding for our show, and that is absolutely priceless. So I still see that there is a potential to use our own creativity as human beings, and also generated creativity. And I'm not even sure that I would call it AI anymore. At the Edinburgh talk that I gave in December, this man spoke up and he said he'd been in IT for a very long time. He says it's not AI. What it is essentially is when you put out kind of a request to create anything by AI, what it does is it gathers what's already available and kind of puts it into one hole. That's the best way I can think of articulating it. And I tend to agree with him. I don't think it is artificial intelligence. I don't think intelligence itself can be artificial. That's the whole point about intelligence, is it's man-made. So I'm not convinced by this whole idea of AI as such. I think it is actually what it is drawing together what already exists on the internet. And I know that for one example, because when I ask about official stories, what does AI think about official stories? It always tells me official narratives. It never looks at alternatives. And Madeleine McCann is a perfect one. Not only can AI not spell Madeleine McCann's name, because all over the internet people are spelling Madeleine's name wrong, But it also tells me absolutely categorically that Madeleine was abducted. And we know that there is a whole other narrative regarding Marilyn. I keep saying, for some reason, Marilyn Monroe instead of Madeleine McCann. I know it's MM, so alliteration and all that. But nonetheless, it's weird. What's that? Metal contains intelligence and consciousness, says Mike's. What's that? Rinse and repeat AI. Anyway, I agree with you, Shin. I think we have to be careful because you can't beat human creativity. Not really. Not really. But I did start out from a position formally where I was like completely opposed to anything which is kind of like computer generated. But our intro tune has changed that for me because I've seen the impact it's had on other people. So it's tricky. It's really tricky. It really is. And we are going to end soon. Just thank you as ever to our donators. Jort van Dijk. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Thanks from Holland. I appreciate that so much. Louise, Young Linda, Peter B, and of course, all my patrons. My daughter is currently in the US. She sent me this video. I wouldn't do this, but this is my daughter for you. She got into a driverless cab in San Francisco, a Waymo taxi. It's associated with Google. And this is it. There's no driver. My daughter is in the back of that cab filming it. That would freak me out. I looked online about these kind of driverless cars, and they're far from perfect, obviously. I'm just going to play that again because I find it so bizarre to see that. It's creepy. Shug said, not for me, Johnny cabs. I just find that creepy. I wouldn't be keen on that at all. But I saw people in these cabs and they were like stopping and taking wrong turning. And then people have to contact the cab company from the back of a car. I'd rather have a human being. Thank you. Drumstick is not getting into a driverless car. Absolutely, Jack. My daughter. Rachel says, us creatives have to sign a form saying not to use our work. It's our livelihood. Absolutely. And obviously what we've seen is a lot of musicians now who are coming out against it, and rightfully so. It is. And in the same way as when I create a documentary, for example, I don't want that to be, pulled up into some AI. It's not okay. And our work needs to be protected. That's what they should be protecting on the internet, right? And that is people's creativity. They should definitely be protecting that. Really, Stephen, driverless trains are already around. Really, are they? Have you ever covered the death of Aaron Carter? I haven't, Marco. I know who you're talking about. You're talking about, is it Nick Carter from the Backstreet Boys brother? Obviously the more famous brother, but Aaron, didn't he go through hell? Weren't they abused? I'll look into it. I've seen the changing timeline, by the way, to do with Gene Hackman. I want to look into that more on Friday. Wednesday is pretty much a catch up more than anything else. I think, though, that I should play this because this I will never recover from. I will never recover from it because I believe that this was mass gaslighting, and seeing it is as it was 5 years ago this week when the UK brought in ridiculous measures. This is something that nobody should ever forget. Matt Hancock, who was the health secretary, was at the COVID inquiry, I think yesterday and today, testifying. I certainly saw him today. And of course, Matt Hancock is walking around free. He shouldn't be. At the very least, he should be under investigation for what he did. But this we can never forget. This was where the first COVID jab was given, apparently, on live TV, and with the support of Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid. Never forget this, people. This was Matt Hancock, who was supposed to be crying, but he was laughing. Check it out.
Simple words there, reacting it. You're quite emotional about that.
Well, it's just, it's been such a tough year for so many people, and there's William Shakespeare putting it so simply for everybody that, we can get on with our lives.
William Shakespeare, one of the first jabbies, and Matt Hancock laughing but pretending to cry. And neither Piers Morgan nor Susanna Reid called him out. In fact, Piers Morgan supported him, backed him up by saying, you're so emotional there. Yeah, he's so emotional because he's laughing at everybody. That was pure gaslighting, and I will never, ever forget it. ever. He's laughing, 100%. And Mrs. Pirate will never forget, never, ever forget. Right, today's show, as we know, has been about universal lies that some of them have gone on for decades, some far back in history, such as JFK, and some more recent, like the C-19 lies. But bit by bit, they are being exposed. It's hard, it's painful. I see you in the comments. What can we do? All we can do is keep highlighting it the best that we can, while in the background working away, issuing freedom of information requests, anything that we can to build up a picture. It's very, very difficult because the people who are responsible, some of them are still around. That's one of the reasons why there's so many issues with the JFK files, because the Bushes are still around, as one example. And I'll never forget, Priscilla. I will never, ever forget either. So I want to wish you a lovely evening, a lovely Thursday. I'll see you Friday. And I want to end with this. Deceit has a deadline, but the truth lives on indefinitely. You heard me. Have a great, great evening. I will see you Friday. Lovely people. Thank you for Shin. She's done a sterling job modding on her own today. Take good care of yourself. Thank you for all the live comments. Thank you for watching wherever you're watching, whether you're watching live or on playback. You know you are truly, truly appreciated. And I will see you Friday. Love you all. Take good care of yourself.